this is going to be our last review. We are looking at World War II. We did this right before spring break. So it should be refreshed in your memory. And I'm just going to do the World War II part because we're kind of doing Cold War together right now. But we know prior to World War II that World War II really stemmed in the Depression and the stuff that did not get resolved from World War I. At the same time, FDR is taking office. Hitler is taking office well in Germany. Hitler introduces compulsory military service. It's a violation of the League of Nations and not the League of Nations, but the Treaty of Versailles. The League of Nations should have done something, but they don't. He takes away the demilitarized Rhineland, which was an area that was taken away from him. That should have been assigned, but that's going to be one of the things. He's trying to unite his Aryan race through all of these areas, and he's going to justify him taking it over. Mussolini takes over Ethiopia, and the first Neutrality Act is passed that Americans cannot trade or sell on belligerent ships. Spain is in the middle of civil war, so Francisco Franco stays out. The Second Neutrality Act comes out that we will not make loans to the belligerents. And again, the U.S. is trying to keep peace at any price, and we are going to demilitarize our military. FDR wins for a second term. The Third Neutrality Act comes out saying that we will not let Americans travel on belligerent ships. Japan attacks China, and at this time, FDR says it's an incident. It's an incident because if we called it a full-out war, we could not send weapons to China. FDR gives a quarantine speech saying that we will not trade with the aggressors. Hitler invades Austria, and again, this is a violation of the Treaty of Versailles. And again, they're appeasing him. In the Munich conference, we see Neville Chamberlain saying, no, that's the last thing he was going to take. We appease the aggressor, and we see he promises that would be his last thing. Then he goes into Czechoslovakia, and then eventually when he invades Poland, that starts off World War II. The U.S. passes the Fourth Neutrality Act saying that any nation fighting could come and purchase arms in America as long as they pay it in cash and carry it on their own. He's trying to prevent the reasons why we went into World War I. We give aid to Finland because they're being invaded by the Soviet Union, and they've been paying back their debts. France falls, and then this is when we have the invasion of Britain, and we see that the British are able to withstand the Germans because they do have the radar. The U.S. realizes that we're in the midst of a war, that we could get involved, and we do the conscription. We start building up our Navy and our Army. We have the Havana Conference saying that we will keep those aggressors on that side. And Roosevelt makes a treaty with the British of destroyers for bases. They will give us some bases for 99 years, and we'll give them some old destroyers from World War I. Again, we're kind of siding with the Allies. Japan joins Germany to form the Axis, and we put the embargo on Japan, and we lend lease, that we're going to lend and lease weapons to the Allies. And again, this is kind of us siding with the Allies. The Germans start torpedoing American merchant ships, and then Roosevelt will do the shoot-on-sight policy. We will send billions of aid to the Soviet Union. We will freeze the Japanese assets. We'll start escorting. And again, we're fishing for a war here. FDR meets with Churchill, and they start negotiating the terms of the end of World War II, even though we're not involved in it. And we do the shoot on sight, and the Congress withdraws the Neutrality Acts, and eventually we will get the attack on Pearl Harbor where war is declared. So just the political spectrum, the communists, they want power in the hands of groups. We'll look at that later when we get to the Cold War. So causes of World War II in Europe, the Treaty of Versailles was really harsh, the ineffection of the lease, appeasement, the economic worldwide depression, which allows for the rise of totalitarian governments. But what we're going to do is we're going to cover the war in two theaters. The first one is in Europe. And again, that was ABC plan, get Germany first. We see Hitler when he invades Poland. That starts World War I. Then he takes Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and France. France tries to prepare by the Matignon Line. But again, the Germans attack through the weaker lines. They go through Belgium, and they take over France quickly. The Battle of Britain, where they're able to withstand the Germans because of the radar. The Soviet Union invades in 1941. Pearl Harbor happens. And the Soviet Union is going to take the grunt of the war. A lot of it is because they have promised to stay out of the war with the Non-Aggression Pact. But as the war is going on and the U.S. joins, they have the first conference in Casablanca. And Stalin really wants a second front in France, but what they decided at Casablanca is to come up the underbelly into Italy. Pearl Harbor will eventually bring us into the war. Stalingrad is one of the bloodiest days of the war. And after this, we will see that this is when the second conference, Tehran, occurs, where they agree to open up the second front in France. And we do the North Africa campaign, which prepares us for the D-Day invasion. And the D-Day invasion is the largest land, air, amphibious assault that we see. And it basically gives control of France so that we can have a land invasion, and will eventually lead to Battle of the Bulge, where the Germans are retreating. And we see that eventually we get Victory Day, May 7th in 1945. Then we're going to focus on the second front, which is the war in the Pacific. And a lot of what has been happening in the Pacific is the Japanese have been coming to qualms with the United States because of the U.S. expansion in the Pacific. We have to understand the Japanese values. It was honorable to die for the emperor. It was dishonorable to surrender. They worshiped their emperor, and they believed that they had racial pride. We see that there have been problems prior to Pearl Harbor. They attacked China. We called it an incident. We didn't want to call it a war because we would have to stop giving aid to China. We place an embargo on their stuff. We freeze their assets. We break their code. We know they're going to attack somewhere. And when they do attack on December 7th, they not only attack in Hawaii, but they attack Guam, Wake, and Hong Kong. And so we know that half of our fleet has been destroyed in the Pacific. So we're going to focus on Europe first. We are going to see that we try to go into the Philippines and obtain a naval base there. Our soldiers are captured. We see that MacArthur is rescued, and most of our soldiers are there, go on the Bataan Death March. They try to take the Aleutian Islands, but the only way to stop them is through the island hopping. We see Doolittle does a raid on Tokyo, but then they know that we are going to have to attain a lot of bases around here to have an air assault invasion. So this is when that island hopping we see comes in. We see the Battle of Corsi, the Battle of Midway turns the tide of the Japanese proceeding any further to the United States. And again, we see that they just island hop. They go to the least fortified islands to get closer and closer to Japan so we could have an air invasion, because we had not thought that we were going to have the atomic bomb. Iwo Jima and Okinawa make it evident that the death toll of an invasion of Japan will be astronomical. FDR dies. We know Truman comes in, and we know that that atomic bomb is not ready until July, and it's tested here in America. You see, March and June, we're still thinking an inland invasion. And so what will occur is they have Potsdam. And at Potsdam, Truman gives that ultimatum. And we know that Japan had been trying to negotiate with the Soviet Union to get out of this war. But we dropped the first bomb on Hiroshima. And the next bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, which we know was because the other place that they were supposed to draw at Koraku was kind of foggy and they needed to see the site. But a lot of this, many people say, yes, we were trying to end the war, save lives, but many people were fearful that if the Soviet Union were to come in, that we would have to share area. Japan will surrender, and then we see the war is over. But our home front is transformed. We see the War Productions Board goes in, and we're going to see that they basically turn our economy, that the government is telling businesses what they will do. We see the Office of Price Administration regulate prices because of things, prices are going to go up. The War Labor Board is going to try to negotiate with labor unions not to strike. Women go to work, which we saw in World War I. We see African Americans go to work. Women take into non-combat positions in the military in the waves, the wax, and the spars. We see that minorities come into the workforce. And this is when Roosevelt initiates the Executive Order 8802 to make sure that there's not discrimination for blacks in the industries, because they were. Blacks will be allowed into a first combat unit. Tuskegee Mexican Americans come over in the Bracero program to work the fields because people have left. And disposable income increases. We also know Korematsu, that case, because of Executive Order 9066, the Supreme Court will uphold that in times of war that people's civil liberties can be set aside. So just comparison of what was in both wars Presidents wanted neutrality. The war was because of submarines. We were unprepared. We have bonds, victory gardens, propaganda, blacks move north in the Great Migration, women take up men's jobs, there's racial conflicts. We get mechanization on the farms to increase production for food. We get discrimination of our hyphenated Americans, Mexican Americans. We saw that in the Zoot Suit riots. African Americans. People saved items for war. We had rations. There was labor strikes. Women were in service. Only in World War II, the president spoke on the radio. Roosevelt, we know that he did that in his fireside chats. And we built ships in 10 days. We stopped making consumer goods. The radar helps our planes. We get the atomic reactor, limited housing, and mass migration. Women gain more economic power. Blacks join employment. Teenagers start working and rationing. And I kind of talked about these conferences, Casablanca, where Roosevelt and Churchill meet, deciding the second front will be in North Africa. And it upsets Stalin because he really needed it in France. So he shows up to Tehran, and this is when they agree that it will be in the invasion of France. Yalta is what really determines what the end of the war was going to be. In the Cold War, we're dividing up Germany. We get free elections in Eastern Europe that don't occur. The Soviets would enter the war. We look at that date, August 8th, and so we know why we dropped the bomb on August 6th and August 9th. The Soviets get a little portion of the Sakhalin Islands, and then we get the new UN to replace the League. Okay? And last thing was Potsdam, that ultimatum. The last part here is the Cold War, which we've just been doing. So I'm going to end our video there because this is stuff that we've been going over lately, and it's not going to be on the AP test. Okay, guys. Happy testing.